So it's no surprise in 2024, shooting an anamorphic is a little bit more common. Now in previous years, anamorphic lenses were hard to find and they were incredibly expensive, and people stuck with spherical lenses instead. Now with the introduction of more affordable anamorphic lens brands and different releases that are coming out, it's actually becoming a format that's more accessible. But why would you choose an anamorphic lens versus a spherical one? Today's video, I want to dive into some of my opinions, some of my thought process as to why I would choose an anamorphic lens versus something that's a bit more spherical, and what are the difference between the two, and also what are the intentions that you might have in either direction. That was a long wave-winded saying, we'll get there. Oh, just so you guys know, Artless is sponsoring this video, but this isn't necessarily about filling my pockets, it actually might fill yours, with their 100K giveaway to fund your next film. More on that a little bit later. Now, one reason why people pick anamorphic lenses instead of spherical lenses is going to be that anamorphic flare. Shocker. Now, when you're using an anamorphic lens, one thing you have to do is de-squeeze the footage. And once you've stretched out some of that footage, light sources are going to have that horizontal anamorphic flare. Now, you can choose which color you want. There's warm flares, amber flares, blue flares, there's all kinds of different types. But one thing that's going to be really common is that when you position yourself in the right way in front of something that's a light, well, you're going to get those flaring, which you might not get on spherical lenses. Oftentimes, spherical lens flares are going to be a little bit more circular, where you're going to get that beam on an anamorphic lens. It's a great way of adding a little bit more detail in terms of things in your footage. For example, if you have a light source in a darker scene, it helps really accentuate the fact that something is dark, and also it just looks really cool as well. Now, anamorphic lenses and spherical lenses may have different aspect ratios that you might be working with. For example, if you're using something like a Sony FX3 that's a 16:9, using a spherical lens or a photography lens is going to work really well in that 16:9 aspect ratio. Generally speaking, an anamorphic deliverable is going to be a 2:1, which is something that you might see a little bit more if you're in a movie theater with a widescreen field of view. In most cases, anamorphic lenses are meant for wider screen deliverables, and when we talk about what we're going to get from an image from an anamorphic lens versus spherical, it's going to make a little bit more sense. Now, anamorphic lenses are going to give you a little bit more field of view while still keeping the depth of field of the focal length you're going to be using. There's an easier way to explain this. Now, I'm using a 45mm Remus lens by Blazar, and I also have beside it a DZO 40mm lens. Now, I get it, they're not the same focal length, but in terms of that background in relation to the foreground, they're going to look pretty similar to each other. But when I put them both on the same screen, you're going to notice that you get a little bit or a lot more width on the sides when you're working with an anamorphic lens. Now, when you're creating this for a widescreen deliverable, this is what things are going to look like. When you're working with a wide screen, obviously having more footage on the sides is going to be a lot more helpful. Whereas using a spherical lens, it fits a lot more into that 16:9, which most of our computers can see, most Windows can see, but at the same time, when you compare the two, you are going to get the best of both worlds. You're going to get the depth of field that you want out of something that's a 40mm or 45mm focal length, but at the same time, your horizontal width is going to be closer if you divide that 45mm by the 1.5 or the squeeze factor of the lens that you're working with. In this case, it's going to be somewhere near like 30 or something like that. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that anamorphic lenses are the perfect lens choice every single time. There's a couple things you're going to have to realize, and for one, anamorphic lenses don't really have great minimum focusing distance. Now, you can use things like diopters in order to get a little bit closer. Diopters are kind of like magnifying lenses, the same way that ND filters are the same as sunglasses. What it's going to do is it's going to increase that minimum focusing distance, not by physically changing the lens, but actually bringing the image a little bit closer. It's a little bit more complicated than that, but I'm going to explain that in this video over here. But essentially, diopters are more magnifying lenses at that minimum focusing distance, so you can get a little bit closer even though you're using the same exact lens. Another thing that you might not realize about anamorphic lenses versus spherical ones is that anamorphic lenses typically start at a more closer focal length. For example, I do have a 12mm DZO Vespid Prime, which is one of the wider, if not the widest, full frame focal length that you can get in a cinema lens. You might be able to get a little bit wider, but my point is that if you're working with an anamorphic lens, typically they're going to start about 35mm and above. I've used a Sirui 35mm Saturn lens, and right now I'm working with the Pavos by DZO as well, and I've also shot a project on the Blazars as well, and not any of them got wider than 30mm. In fact, the widest end on the Pavo anamorphics are going to be about a 32, but it's also a Super 35 lens, so you are going to have a little bit of math there. Generally speaking, when working with anamorphic lenses, you're going to get a little bit more on the telephoto side of things. And by telephoto, I just mean it's going to have a higher focal length number, not necessarily to say that it's at 7200 or anything like that. If you are somebody that's looking for a wider field of view in your lenses, you might be looking at something like a spherical lens, and you might have to fake it with those anamorphic bars. However, the focal length that you can get out of spherical lenses typically are going to give you a lot more range on the wider end, where on anamorphic lenses, you start a little bit higher. Now there's also going to be sensor demands that are going to be a bit different and also might get a little bit annoying depending on the camera you're using. Now with a lot of cameras nowadays and the demand to have open gate cameras, right now I'm shooting on the Panasonic S9 and I have a Blackmagic Pixis behind me. One of the great things and one of the great selling features is the ability to use open gate, which gives you a lot more resolution on the top and the bottom of your frame. That way when you de-squeeze the footage, you're working with a little bit more resolution versus something like an FX3. I'm going to give you an example here. If I shoot at a 2x anamorphic on a 16:9 sensor like the FX3, what's going to end up happening is you're going to notice that it's only going to give you a bit of a sliver in terms of the data that you can work with. On the flip side, if I use something like a Blackmagic Pixis that can give you that 6K open gate, even if I go down to a 4K open gate, you're going to get a lot more resolution and information while using an anamorphic lens. The reason why is because you're de-squeezing that footage, and sometimes when you de-squeeze that footage, when you don't have as much resolution on the top and the bottom, you just end up losing that in the process of creating anamorphic footage. Now, if this is something that doesn't bother you that much and out of sight, out of mind, you could always just zoom things in, but when you do zoom those things in to equate those aspect ratios, you have a little bit less to work with versus using a open gate sensor. Now, anamorphic lenses are going to be a little bit more, I don't know, useful using an open gate sensor. However, not every camera has open gate. In fact, most of them are going to be your Lumix and your Blackmagics. Even your Red cameras are still technically open gate, but they are a 17:9 sensor. So you are still going to lose a little bit of resolution even when shooting anamorphics compared to using something that's a 3x2 open gate like some of the other cameras that I've mentioned already. It's also kind of cool that the S9 can do anamorphic. It's really cool for the price point. Another thing to consider is that anamorphic lenses are typically more expensive than spherical ones. Now, this gets disrupted a little bit with the entrance of the Blazar Remus and the Blazar Katos, as per lens, they're actually a lot cheaper than you think. In fact, even Sure had some lenses last year as well that are anamorphics that are a lot cheaper. However, I haven't seen one that's below $1,000. So in terms of a full frame anamorphic lens, albeit they're way cheaper than what they used to be, the cheapest anamorphic full frame lens is still a little bit more expensive than a full frame spherical lens. If you're looking to save a little bit of money, anamorphic isn't the way to go. I don't know what to tell you. However, there are a lot of affordable options. Just on average, anamorphics are going to be more expensive. Now, I get it. We've been talking about pretty expensive things as far as lenses go, and trying to find the funding for that can be a little bit difficult. Finding funding for your film even is a little bit difficult as well. But the sponsor of this video, Artlist, might actually have a solution for you. Now, Artlist is bringing back the 100K fund, a way that you can get $100,000 for your next film project. And the steps are incredibly easy. All you have to do is post a video on your socials and make sure you tag Artlist and let Artlist know, and actually let me know, what your 100,000 idea is for your next film. Now, you don't have to make a narrative film. I'm not really good at narrative. I prefer documentaries and commercials, and those are just fine. You can even do things like fashion films or travel films or whatever film project you want. As long as it's a really good idea, you might be a winner. You also have to make sure that you are tagging the Artlist 100K fund, and then you just have to be patient and wait and see who wins. Now, these entries will last until October the 24th, 2024, so you do have a little bit of time from the time of this video, and I suggest you might want to pause it, go and do that, and then come back with an emoji of your favorite animal. Artlist has done a great job of supporting independent filmmakers and also giving me the music that I need for my videos and my other projects. I use them for client stuff. I've used them more than once on videos just like these. And even sometimes in a pinch, I have used the AI voiceover as well to help me out in terms of my filmmaking. And they're able to help you guys out by giving you $100 grand for your next project. All you have to do is follow those steps. They're super easy, and let me know what your 100,000 video idea is, but also don't forget to post that video. Now let's get back and talk about anamorphic lenses and spherical lenses, because I'm sure if you guys won this, you probably want to hear this out. Now, in terms of your aperture and your iris between anamorphic lenses and spherical ones, you can't open up pretty wide on anamorphic lenses. We just spent a whole trip in Utah testing out the Blackmagic Pixis while I was using some of the Atlas Mercury lenses. Now, this guy can't open to like a T2.4 or T2.8, which is actually pretty nice. However, there are a bunch of different lenses that can open up to a T1.5 or a T2 in the spherical aspect of things. For example, there's a video that I just made on the DZO Arliss primes. Now, the Arliss primes can open up to a T1.5, and it's still pretty sharp when you're shooting wide open. However, if I use the Pavo anamorphics, yeah, I could shoot at a T2.4 or a T2.8, but it still might be a little bit soft and you still might get some imperfections, or you just might not get the sharpest image in the world. You may have to stop down a little bit more on anamorphic lenses in order to get a sharper image. While using the Blazar Remus lenses, you gotta go down to a T2.8 or a T2.8 split in order to get the sharpness that you're looking for. The same is true when you're using the Pavo anamorphics by DZO. Even when I was using the Atlas Mercuries, a high quality quality lens with a really high price tag, you still gotta stop down a little bit in order to get a sharper image at that aperture. Where on the flip side, if you're working with spherical lenses, you get a sharper image, depending on how expensive the lens is, while using wider apertures. Now, at the end of the day, that's all fine and good, but there are some things you want to consider with anamorphic lenses. It's not necessarily the tech specs, but why you want to use anamorphics in the first place. Now, if you're someone that likes to shoot multimedia, you like to shoot 1x1s and 9x16s, you want to get vertical content, essentially with anamorphic lenses, you're going to get a lot of information that are going to be on the horizontal parts of your frame, while at the same time being able to keep resolution while getting the vertical sides, albeit if you're using open gate. Now, one of the things you might want to consider is the deliverable that you have while working with anamorphic lenses. If you're posting the next Instagram story, probably don't want to get an Atlas Mercury lens to do that, even if you could turn them vertical and you can get some vertical flaring. You might want to look at something more spherical while still using open gate, honestly, and still having the resolution and the aspect ratio to actually cut up in different aspect ratios depending on your deliverable. The cool thing about anamorphic lenses, which we mentioned before, is that you get a lot of information on the horizontal plane in terms of your image. If you're in a location or a situation where you want people to see the background, you want them to see the landscape, maybe there's a lot of art design in terms of your scene, or maybe you're shooting Cybertrucks off the side of a mountain in Utah. It doesn't necessarily matter. If you want to get more of the horizontal parts of your frame, an anamorphic lens does a really good job of that because of its aspect ratio final deliverable. Compared to spherical lenses, you're going to get a little bit more information on your left and right side. And if you put a lot of effort to make that left and right side look really good, anamorphic lenses might be something you want to put into your bag. Now, what's really nice is that they're a lot more affordable, and I've been working with a couple of different anamorphic lenses between the Blazars, the Atlas Mercuries, which look objectively great. And right now I am working on the Pavo anamorphics as well with the Blackmagic Pixis and some other cameras doing some testing. And if you guys want to see a full review of these, because I got them for a while, you can always leave a comment in the comment section. That being said, I wanted to pick my own brain in terms of why I might pick an anamorphic lens versus a spherical ones. I have a couple of projects that are coming up where I get to make that decision of whether I want to go with my DZO Vespa primes or shoot on the Pavo anamorphics. And the next one I'm going to shoot on the Pavo anamorphics, mostly because of everything I said in this video. If you guys do like this video, press the subscribe button, it's absolutely free. And a special shout out to Artlist for actually sponsoring this video, because you guys can win $100,000 for your next film, which I don't have the access to, so you guys are gonna have to do it for me. That being said, I'll see you in the next one. Peace.